This lecture examines the internal security issues facing the Korean Peninsula. First, it will provide some background to the Korean Peninsula and why both South Korea and North Korea are states with a strong focus on public order and institutions to maintain internal security. Second, it will then compare and contrast internal security issues within South Korea and then North Korea by examining both states' internal security apparatuses. Then, it will conclude with an examination of the whole of the Korean Peninsula. The Korean Peninsula is the most highly militarized site in the world, and most scholars would place the South-North Korean conflict within the discipline of international security issues. The argument could be made that this can also be considered from an internal security perspective, as both Seoul and Pyongyang continue to claim sovereignty over the whole peninsula. With the Korean War effectively a civil war that has not officially concluded, and both regimes wishing to unify Korea under its own banner, this case study will raise questions as to what are the objectives for both states in maintaining its internal security apparatuses. So, Korea's early history. Korea was once an independent agrarian kingdom with continuous administration of state control over a given territory for thousands of years. Many of the pivotal ideas in regarding order, the state, and security come from this early history of Korea. Since the 10th century, Korea had the prerequisites for nationhood long before most other countries: common ethnicity, language, and culture, as well as long recognized boundaries. The imagined beginning of the Korean nation for the contemporary North and South was the 3rd millennium BC, when a king named Tangun founded Old Chosun. Chosun remains the name of the country in North Korea, whereas South Koreans use the term Hanguk, its usage dating from the 1890s. The Koryu dynasty wrote of Tangun's birth. In those days, there lived a she-bear and a tigress in the same cave. They prayed to Hwanung, the king who had descended from heaven, to be blessed with incarnation as human beings. The king took pity on them and gave each a bunch of mugwort and 20 pieces of garlic, saying, "If you eat this holy food and do not see the sunlight for 100 days, you will become human beings." The she-bear and tigress took the food and ate it and retired into the cave. In 21 days, the bear, who had faithfully observed the king's instructions, became a woman, but the tigress, who had disobeyed, remained in her original form. The bear woman could find no husband, so she prayed under the sandalwood tree to be blessed with a child. Hwanung heard her prayers and married her. She conceived and bore a son, who was called Tangun Wanggom, the king of sandalwood. And so came the birth of the Korean nation. Nationalist historians assert a linear, homogeneous evolution of the Korean people, from the distant point of Tangun's appearance to the Koreans of today. Moreover, the Korean king was not just considered a person, he was also a continuous presence from the time of Tangun down to the present, a vessel filled by different people at different times who drew their legitimacy from this internal lineage. For example, under its first president, South Korea used a calendar in which Tangun's birthday constituted Year 1, and in September 1993, the North Koreans interrupted the ongoing nuclear crisis at the time involving the United States to announce the discovery of Tangun's tomb and a few remains of his skeleton. They stated, "The founding of Old Chosun by Tangun 5,000 years ago marked an epochal occasion in the name of the Korean nation. With the founding of the state of Old Chosun, an integrated political unit was established, the blood ties and cultural commonness of the population was strengthened. The Koreans are a homogeneous nation who inherited the same blood and culture consistently down through history." Another classic text that has influenced the ideas and structure of Korean society is the Tasre, or Great Learning, which states, "Wishing to order well their states, they first regulated their families. Wishing to regulate their families, they first cultivated their persons. Wishing to cultivate their persons, they first rectified their hearts. Wishing to rectify their hearts, they first sought to be sincere in their thoughts. Wishing to be sincere in their thoughts, they first extended their utmost knowledge." Here the text calls for one to first rectify oneself, one's family, and finally the state. That is, from the individual to the society and the polity, all are to be put in harmonious order. King Songjong from the Kyoryu area stated that in governing country, nothing surpasses filial piety. It constitutes the core of all virtues. Moreover, the proper relationship between father and son was and is the most important of the filial relations, the basic paradigm for all hierarchical relationships in a moral society. the underlying principle of piety being a hierarchy within a web of duties and obligations based on gender, seniority, and age, which endowed certain prestige and privileges. This further extended to politics. Transgressors of these elaborate rules of hierarchy were regarded as uncultured beings unfit to be members of society. Towards more recent history, and to further understand how these principles manifest in modern Korean society and its internal security issues, I will skip ahead to the end of World War II. It is important to note that both of the modern Koreas, the Republic of Korea in the south and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north, emerged as a result of the division of Korea by the United States and the former Soviet Union at the end of the Second World War. However, another major influence was the Japanese occupation and annexation as a colony from 1905 to 1945. The Koreans credit this era for snatching away their sovereignty and independence, its indigenous modernization, and above all, its national dignity. However, it is also important to note that many Japanese colonial policies were an influence on the modern Korean state, in particular the notion of a strong centralized state and a ruling elite. Though after enduring almost half a century of Japanese colonial rule in which Korea was stripped of its natural resources to fund the war effort, men were conscripted to work in the factories and fight in the armies, and women were forced to provide sex for Japanese troops, the Koreans had high expectations of freedom and independence, as promised by the Americans and its allies in the Cairo Declaration of December 1943. In December 1945, at a conference in Moscow, the Americans, British, and Soviets decided on a four-power trusteeship over Korea to include China, and it to last for 5 years. The 38th parallel, intended as a line for the temporary division of the country into Soviet and American zones of liberation, thus began to divide the Korean people, not just geographically as a state, but also ideologically as a nation. Furthermore, the Soviets and the Americans continued to build up their respective regimes in the north and south that benefited their own strategic interests. In the north, the Soviets facilitated control by Korean communists, led by Kim Il-sung, a one-time guerrilla leader in Manchuria, who spent the last few years in Soviet training camps. Kim's people endorsed the trusteeship arrangement. In the south, however, the Americans continued their pursuit of a liberal democratic regime in the image of their own government. They hoped to create, through democratic political processes, a government of moderate leftists and rightists. The result was chaos, as the rightists, led by Syngman Rhee, continued to oppose the trusteeship arrangement and demand immediate independence. To this end, the best chance for a united democratic regime was rejected. The Soviet-American relationship deteriorated, and the chances for reunifying Korea vanished. Soviet occupation forces resisted efforts made by the Americans to expedite reunification and began training Korean communists and establishing a communist puppet regime. A UN resolution for nationwide free elections was effectively ignored by the Soviets in the north, and as a result, elections were held in the south, leading to the formation of the National Assembly and the Constitution of the Republic of Korea. The People's Committee of North Korea was created under Russian guidance as a national government. In the south, Rhee was strong support with those who had collaborated with the Japanese and were eager to retain their wealth and power, terrorized intellectuals, peasants, and workers, determined to punish collaborators and create a more egalitarian society. With support of the American troops, the Korean National Police, a remnant of Japanese colonialism, and a constabulary created by the Americans, killed tens of thousands of supporters of the leftist Korean People's Government, despite few of them having connections to the Communist Party. Rhee had competing national leaders assassinated, including the popular leftist Yo On-hyung, to facilitate his own elections as president in May 1948. Some historians, such as Carter Eckert, argued that long before the 38th parallel division of Korea, Korea was already an ideologically bifurcated society held together by the power of the colonial state. In August 1948, thus, the Republic of Korea was proclaimed in the south with the capital of Seoul. In the north, elections brought the communists to power, and in September 1948, they proclaimed the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea with its capital in Pyongyang. Korea had become a divided nation with two states, a communist-controlled regime in the north and an intensely anti-communist developing democracy in the south. Both Kim and Rhee were each determined to unite the two Korean states under his own leadership. From the end of 1948 to June 1950, there were constant cross-border skirmishes by both sides. On June 25, 1950, Korean Communist forces swept across the 38th parallel, emboldened by the presumed lack of US support for Syngman Rhee's increasingly oppressive and undemocratic regime. The United States, though, came to the aid of South Korea, and bitter fighting ensued until the Chinese intervened to assist the North Koreans and the Soviets, and to prevent the unification of Korea under a government likely to be hostile to Beijing. This intervention brought about stabilization of the fighting along the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, and trench warfare ensued for the next 2 years. On July 27, 1953, the DPRK, the PRC, and the UN, whilst the ROK abstained, signed an armistice agreement agreeing to a new border near the 38th parallel as a demarcation line between South and North. Both sides would maintain and patrol a DMZ surrounding that border line. The armistice was only a ceasefire agreement, not a formal peace treaty ending the war. A final peace treaty was supposed to be on the agenda at the 1954 Geneva Conference, but by the time the conference was to begin, the French colonial war in Indochina took precedence. Ultimately, the US and the ROK signed a mutual defense treaty, and US troops became part of DMZ patrols on a regular basis. Today, both North and South continue to claim sole legitimate authority and sovereignty over the peninsula. Yet while there are differences, there are also similarities in both societies, pertaining to the maintenance of public order and the establishment of its internal security institutions. In both modern North and South Korea, the principles of hierarchy and inequality remain deeply ingrained in Korean society, and until today remain not just a fact of life, but also how to organize a proper society. Family rearing principles are extended to politics and to the state. According to Bruce Cummings' Modern History of Korea, the citizen is not considered an individual detached from society, but rather the building block of the whole, the basis of a society organically conceived. It is further important to remember that modern South and North Korea have developed in response to the perceptions that they have each other, both as a hostile neighboring state and as a nation that will one day be reunified. This, along with the underlying principles of order and hierarchy, have had particular influence on the internal security apparatuses and the challenges both societies face.